Hey, this is Tommy Smith with Rattle and Hump Sports, rnhsports.com, here with our weekly Big 12 football report. This is week 7. We'll take a look back at the games of week 6 and a peek forward to the games of week 7. And to do that with me, as always, is Matthew Postins. Matthew is the the editor for College Football America and publisher for Road Trip Sports. Matthew, how are you doing this evening?
I'm fine, Tommy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks again for joining us as always. Take a quick look back at the games of week 6. Obviously, the big one on the schedule was the Texas-Oklahoma Red River Showdown, as it was called this year. Heading into that game, of course, was all the noise coming out of Austin about Charlie Strong and his job security. He did demote Vance Bedford to secondary coach. He was calling the shots on defense, and didn't quite work out so well for Coach Strong against Oklahoma. Talk a little bit about the Sooners and Horns, and what do you make of that game?
Well, giving up 672 yards of total offense to Oklahoma wasn't a good look for Charlie Strong in his first week as defensive coordinator in name and in intent for Texas. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that he can't turn things around defensively. You got to understand, the head coach typically isn't in the defensive room every single day with the head coach. They usually trust their coordinators to do their jobs, run the rooms, come up with game plans, etc. It's not like Charlie Strong is sitting on Vance Bedford's shoulder every single minute of every day when he's the defensive coordinator. Now that Charlie's in the room every day and he's the one coming up with the game plans, it's going to take him a little time to make the necessary adjustments. He talked to the media down in Austin today and said, it's a matter of getting guys in the right places, continuing to emphasize execution, and continuing to get these guys to do the things we need them to do. It's what he's been saying all season, and they're still not there yet. So, like we talked about last week, this is what's going to define Charlie Strong and what's going to keep him employed, because the offense isn't the problem. I mean, they put up 40 points for the third time in 5 games this year.
Without Chris Warren.
Without Chris Warren. They did it with Deontay Foreman. They did it with Shane Buechele and a talented group of receivers. Offense isn't the problem right now. Defense is where this team is struggling. That's his forte, and that's why he's kind of put all his chips to the table and said, I'm going to be in charge now. I'm going to be the guy. And after 1 week, it's not a good look for him. On the other side, Oklahoma, we kind of talked a little bit after the TCU game about how they kind of look like themselves now, or at least starting to. I think we saw that Oklahoma's kind of turned the corner from an offensive standpoint. You're looking at Sanaje Perine, who had 214 yards rushing in that game. They're a much better offense when he's the focal point in terms of when they run the football. Bob Stoops made the point earlier today on the phone call with the media that Perine kind of struggled earlier in the year because of the ankle injury. Well, they got the bye week after the loss to Ohio State. I think they got him healthy. He had a solid game against TCU, scored a couple of touchdowns in that game, and now the big game against Texas. I think now you have him humming along. D.D. Westbrook's over his minor injury. He had more than 200 yards receiving and 3 touchdowns. And, of course, Baker Mayfield's now playing like the Baker Mayfield we saw last year. From an offensive standpoint, Oklahoma now looks like the best overall offense in the Big 12. You can make a case for Patrick Mahomes being the most productive quarterback, but in terms of overall offensive scheme, Oklahoma looks like they're the Sooners we saw last year that made the college football playoff. And while they're probably not contenders for the CFP at this point, they certainly are starting to look like the best team in the Big 12 again.
And all quiet so far today on the Charlie Strong job front. How much longer do you think that goes before we start hearing some more noise out of Austin?
Well, yeah, I think you'd probably give it a little bit more time. They've got Iowa State this week. I was at the Oklahoma State-Iowa State game, and I know we'll talk about that next. But you'd like to think that Mike Perrin, their athletic director, will judge Charlie Strong on the bulk of the year and not just a few weeks during the year. I was talking with our College Football America publisher, Kendall Love, over the weekend, and he kind of posed the question, does this mean Charlie's done, or does this, do you think he's this much closer to being done? I'd like to think that Mike Perrin is going to give him a little bit more time to see if he can get the defense back back to where it was playing, at times last year when it really, was able to influence what was happening in the football game, but just didn't have the offense to win games. That said, the alumni base, the donor base, the booster base in Texas is really unhappy right now.
Yeah.
I think they expected this team to be better. They expected them to be more competitive, especially after the Notre Dame game when they just blasted the Irish. So I don't know if he gets the whole year to get the kind of grade that he's hoping for to stay for a fourth year. I think it's really going to kind of depend on the next few weeks. If we get out of November and this team is still struggling defensively and they're still losing football games, then I don't know what else he'll be able to do to save his job.
Tom Herman and the Houston Cougars lost to the Navy over the weekend, and a lot of talk about Herman, landing a big job for next season. With the Texans fans and the Regents and their kind of sense of entitlement and where we thought, they thought they were going to land Nick Saban, is Tom Herman a guy that the Texas, the Longhorn Nation would be happy with?
Well, the thing was when they replaced Mac, they automatically looked for a big name. And I think the folks in Texas believe they deserve a big name. Well, that would be Les Miles. But the thing is, what Les Miles wants to do offensively and what Texas now has offensively is like this. Way in two different corners of the world. So now that they've got a little distance from Mac Brown, and a little distance from that success and the 2 national championship game appearances, I think they might be willing to take somebody who's less of a name, but has more of an understanding of what they want to do, especially on the offensive side of the football. And that would certainly be somebody like Tom
Herman, certainly. Okay, let's move forward. Again, like you said, you were at Iowa State and Oklahoma State. You texted me part of the way through this game, and it was 31-14 at that point. Iowa State was leading. I had talked earlier in the season about my thoughts on Matt Campbell, and kind of told you I thought Iowa State was a team to look out for. They certainly look like they're starting to get things moving forward. Now, obviously, Oklahoma State comes back and wins the game 38-31. But Joel Lanning had a good game. Talk a little bit about Iowa State, and then we'll get into Oklahoma State after that.
Well, I think with Iowa State, they're just a much better offensive team this year. First of all, I think they need to settle on Joel Lanning as their quarterback. They're still toggling between him and Jacob Park, and after seeing Park in person on Saturday, I can understand why they like him. He escaped a couple of sacks just on sheer athleticism. He's got definite athleticism to get outside the pocket and make some things happen. But guess what? So does Joel Lanning. And I think he throws the football a little better, and I think he understands the offense a lot better right now than Jacob Park. So I think they'd be best served, especially the way that offense put up numbers on Saturday, by making Joel Lanning the starter moving forward and just letting it be his team for a while and see what happens. Mike Warren didn't have a great game, but Oklahoma State really focused on him quite a bit. That actually opened up things for Lanning to run the football a little bit. They got the passing game moving up and down the field. What really hurt them in this game was the inexperience in dealing with a big lead. Same thing that happened to them against Baylor the week before. They had a 17-point lead in this game with Oklahoma State, and the Cowboys, to their credit, they stayed patient. Mike Gundy kind of talked about it after the game. He said he kept telling guys, just be patient, just keep doing your job, things will turn around. And they ultimately did toward the end of the third quarter and into the fourth quarter when they went on that flurry of scoring. The turnover that Iowa State committed was huge. I mean, it really changed the whole momentum of the football game. It allowed Oklahoma State to make it a 3-point game and ultimately allowed the Cowboys to win the game. And I saw Matt Campbell after the game, and I kind of joked with him. I said, you're going to get one of these eventually, Coach. And he kind of smiled, that wry smile of a coach who says, I know it's coming, but I really want it to get here now. Because my guys have played well enough to win the last 2 weeks. They've scored more points in this last 3 games than they had in any 3 games in a decade. So they're turning it around. They just haven't figured out how to get over that hump and make those last 2 or 3 plays they need to make to win the game.
On the Oklahoma State side of things, we saw their defense come to life. I think they had 7 sacks against Iowa State. Quentin Osborne, 2.5 sacks. What about the Oklahoma State defense in this conference, especially? What do you see from them, and what's happening on the horizon?
Well, the defense really kind of kept Oklahoma State in this game. They were able to get a lot of pressure on Joel Lanning and Jacob Park, not just the sacks, but just guys flying around them throughout the game. And it helped them get in the backfield to get to ball carriers, too. We talked about how they kind of controlled Mike Warren. That was part of the way they did it. They got pressure in the backfield off of pass rush and things like that. When you kind of talked about this last week, there are teams in this league that are scoring tons of points. I mean, Texas has scored 40 points in 4 of its 5 games. Oklahoma State scoring points. Everybody in this league scores points. So you can't really judge defenses by the traditional metrics anymore. But one thing you can look at is, are they getting to the quarterback? Are they sacking the quarterback? Are they putting pressure on the quarterback? Because you have to do that in this league. Oklahoma State is second in the Big 12 in sacks at 19 right now, going into their bye week.
Right.
They're a little tired. Mike Gundy kind of talked about it after the game. They've been playing football for 10 weeks now.
Yeah.
When you think about fall practice. So one of the things that really helps them is their ability to get to the quarterback, their ability to sustain a pass rush, because they basically have two sets of defensive linemen they can bring into the game at any time that are all of similar quality. And that's going to serve them well as they get into the rest of the schedule, because there are a lot of good quarterbacks in this league, and you've got to be able to put pressure on them.
And they're going to get a well-deserved week off this week with the bye. Next game we'll look at, and this was an awful close one, TCU escapes Lawrence with a 1-point victory. A last-second 54-yard field goal from the Jayhawks sailed wide to the right. TCU wins this game, I think you say based on experience. A little bit, expand on that a little bit.
Well, I think they just understand how to win. I mean, you've got guys that have been on the last 2 or 3 TCU teams that have won 10-plus games, have shared a conference title, have been in tough, close games with better opponents. And I think ultimately they were able to make a few plays that Kansas wasn't able to make the game. David Beatty kind of talked about that today. He said, my guys, they have to understand that you can't play 50, 55 minutes. You've got to play 60 minutes in a football game. And I guess he felt like there were a few plays they could have made. They missed a few field goals in this game. They put their kicker in a bad situation because they really only had one kicker that could make a 50-plus yard field goal, and they couldn't get any closer to give them a decent shot to win the game.
Yeah.
They committed as many turnovers as TCU did, and that's the big thing in this game. Even though Ryan Willis had a really good game for them at quarterback, finally named the starter, finally seemed comfortable, threw for more than 300 yards. He threw 3 interceptions, just like Kenny Hill did. So had Kansas protected the football a little bit better, we might be talking about Kansas with its first Big 12 win of the season, as opposed to TCU escaping Lawrence with a win that it really needed going into its bye week.
And Kansas, another school like Iowa State that might be getting things together, and later on in the season might pick up that victory. Kenny Hill's first maybe quote-unquote bad game of the season. TCU does have a bye as well this week. What did Coach Patterson say this morning, or anything about Kenny Hill and going forward?
Well, they didn't talk much about Kenny. He just talked about the fact that they're as much in need of a bye as any other team in the conference right now. They want to clean up the mistakes they made. When you think about Gary Patterson teams, they're usually the teams that create mistakes for other teams, not make 4 turnovers in a football game. So they want to clean that up. They want to let all their guys clear their head a little bit this week. I think the big thing for them is that they know they have a defense that can get to the quarterback. They're the #1 team in terms of creating sacks. But they've got to work on their run defense a little bit. That's something they're concerned about. It was kind of exposed a little bit against Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago. That's going to be their big focus going into their bye week this week.
And last game on the schedule from last week, and a game we thought we may not see, Patrick Mahomes at Texas Tech playing the Kansas State Wildcats. He does play, puts up 500 yards passing. However, still not good enough when you're running out of defense that just really can't stop anybody.
The problem in this game was that Texas Tech's defense wasn't able to get stops, but B, Kansas State came with a game plan that they really executed nearly to perfection in the second half from a defensive standpoint. They made adjustments from a coordinator standpoint. They also got players to play better. Bill Snyder was not happy at all about the fact that they gave up 28 points in the first half of this game. It was just Texas Tech going up the field like they always seem to, with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. And then in the second half, the adjustments they made, they bent and they didn't break. Bill Snyder didn't like that word on the call this morning, but that really is what they did. They kept bending and they kept bending, but they wouldn't break. They wouldn't give up points. And ultimately, Kansas State won this game because their special teams came through with a return for a touchdown, and because their defense came through with the defensive touchdown. Those are the kind of the hallmarks of a Bill Snyder team. They make those kinds of plays on special teams and on defense that give their teams a chance to win. And they needed it because Jesse Ertz threw for like 100 yards in this game. They didn't run the ball well. They didn't pile up a lot of offense. They gave up a ton of yards, but their defense did just enough to win the game.
Mm-hmm. Let's take Kansas State then, looking forward to week 7 right off the bat. They will travel to Norman to take on the aforementioned Sooners and things like. Seem like they have found their rhythm on offense and become the Sooners that we expected to see at the beginning of the season. So Kansas State OU is early kick, 11 o'clock on Saturday. What do you see in this game?
Well, the road team has won the last 5 meetings in this series. So don't think that just because Oklahoma seems to be rolling right now and Kansas State's offensively challenged, that doesn't mean that Kansas State has a chance in this game.
Mm-hmm.
They just seem to scheme Oklahoma well,
yeah.
for whatever reason, from a defensive standpoint. They seem to understand how to slow them down. And that's really what you've got to do when you have Baker Mayfield and D.D. Westbrook and Samaje Perine and even Joe Mixon. You have to find a way to slow them down. You have to make them work for their yards, make them work for their first downs, make them work for their points, because you know your offense is challenged.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's going to be the way it's going to be all season for Kansas State. They're going to win games because their defense does enough to slow opponents down, create a few turnovers, and puts their offense in some favorable situations. Oklahoma's defense has gotten better. I still worry about their secondary. They got burned by Texas a couple of times in that game on Saturday, but the thing is, Kansas State really doesn't air it out that much down the field. So I think this is going to be less of a problem this week for their cornerbacks and their safeties than it might be otherwise. I think Oklahoma will win the game. I think they'll finally break that streak of the road team winning that game.
Yeah.
But don't expect it to be a blowout.
And West Virginia comes off a bye to go to Lubbock to take on the vaunted Texas Tech offense and Patrick Mahomes. Dana Holgerson's proud of his defense. He's certainly going to get a test this week in Lubbock. What do you see there?
Well, this is West Virginia's second bye week in about a month. Mm-hmm. So as opposed to Oklahoma State, which is going into its first bye week after basically 10 weeks of practice and football games, West Virginia has a stretch now where they're playing 8 straight weeks. So getting off on a good footing is key for them. Their defense has done good things in the last couple of games. They've been good enough to win. But this is a whole other Megillah with Patrick Mahomes. As long as he's healthy, as long as he's playing, Cliff Kingsbury wouldn't go out of his way to say Mahomes is going to play, but he probably will. If he played, every snap with an AC joint sprain, he's probably going to play this week. What Dana Holgerson likes about his defense is just its overall depth. He feels like he has good guys at every position. He feels like he has guys that can cover downfield. He knows he's going to have to cover downfield. He feels like he has guys that can get to the quarterback. They're going to have to sustain pressure on Mahomes, and they're going to have to keep him in the pocket. They can't let him get outside the pocket because he's as good with his legs as he is with his arm. And as for West Virginia, I think they're going to try and air it out a little bit more than they might otherwise. Sheldon Gibson is the 3rd leading wide receiver in the Big 12 right now, but he's the best in the Big 12 in terms of yards per catch, 24 yards per catch right now. He's one of the best deep threats in the conference. You've probably not seen him because it's West Virginia, and they haven't really played the game against anybody you probably would have seen yet. But he's good, and he's going to have an opportunity to prove it against a weak Texas Tech defense that always seems to give up points and always seems to give up yards. I'm taking West Virginia in this one.
Yeah.
I just don't think Texas Tech. Let's put it like this: if Texas Tech's defense can't slow down Kansas State, then they're not going to slow down West Virginia.
There'll be quite a few points scored in this game.
Yes, I think the over/under. I don't know what the over/under is, but it should probably be about 110.
A 2:30 kick down in Waco, a game I'll be at. Those Kansas Jayhawks will be taking on the Baylor Bears, who are coming off their bye week. Baylor comes in, ranked number 11 or so in the country. Thought of maybe as the best school in the conference right now. I think Oklahoma has something to say about that. But Baylor fans would like to think that maybe they're the front runner to win the conference. We'll find out a little bit more about Baylor. For me, it's how does Baylor get off, to a start. They seem to have started slow just about every week this season, so we'll see what kind of start they get coming off the bye. But what do you see is going on in Waco this weekend?
Well, first of all, Jim Grobe cleared up that Shock Linwood will be the starting running back moving forward. He kind of had a shaky hold on the job there for a couple of weeks, mainly due to practice habits. Yeah. But after his practice going into the Iowa State game and then rolling up 200-plus yards against the Cyclones, plus the bye week, he seems to have sustained the momentum, and now Jim Grobe feels comfortable saying he's going to be the starter moving forward. The running game is key for them.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we talk about the tempo and passing the football all the time, but Baylor really is rooted in running the football with Shock Linwood and Terrence Williams and the other backs they have in that offense. Kansas, I can't get my Kansas straight today. David Beatty talked about the fact that their run defense really needs to get better. And this is going to test them because I think early and often in this game, Baylor's going to want to run the football to establish things there, put Kansas in unfavorable downs and distances from a defensive standpoint, and then let Seth Russell air it out a little bit. I see Baylor winning. I think this is going to be like the Texas Tech game for Kansas where they went on the road to 11 a couple of weeks ago. They're going to be close for 2 or 3 quarters, and then Baylor's going to pull away.
Mm-hmm. And then the final game, Saturday evening, 6 o'clock kick. The Iowa State Cyclones travel to Austin to take on the Texas Longhorns, and we've talked about, and like you said, Matt Campbell saying he knows that win is coming. Very well could be this week in Austin.
It could be. I mean, Iowa State can score enough points to stay with just about any team in this conference now. I mean, I think that's evident over the last couple of weeks. They put 42 on Baylor. They put 31 on Oklahoma State. And this is a Texas defense right now that looks pretty porous. Yeah. I think this is going to be a 30-plus point game for Iowa State. The real question is whether Iowa State can get enough pressure on Shane Buechele, whether they can do enough in pass coverage to keep the Longhorns from getting vertical, because I think they're going to have a hard time slowing down D'Onta Foreman. And if Chris Warren can play, that adds to it. I don't think that Iowa State is big enough up front to handle those guys for 40, 50 plays a game. And if they're able to punch at that Iowa State front four with that running game, that's going to open things up vertically for Shane Buechele to get the ball up the field a little bit more, maybe take advantage of some favorable man coverages down the field. I mean, James Washington had a big game against Iowa State on Saturday, and I don't think there's a receiver in Texas's offense that is as good as James Washington, but Washington proved that the Cyclones can be taken advantage of in man coverage. So I'm going to take Texas. Right now they're actually a 13.5-point favorite. I think that's really asking a lot for Texas to beat them by 14 points to cover. That's a lot of wood to cover. I think Texas will win because they're at home. I think Charlie Strong's going to have the defense playing a little bit better. And I think Iowa State's going to have real problems slowing down this offense.
Anything that we've left out week 7?
We still don't know if anybody's coming to the Big 12 from an expansion standpoint.
Yeah.
I don't know that we'll know anytime soon. It's beginning to sound like it won't happen, but we might see something happen at the last minute. Maybe now because Houston's lost the game, maybe the Big 12's less scared of the Cougars.
Right. We had heard maybe we'd be knowing who those teams might be around this time or the first part of November, but it doesn't sound like anything's really moving forward on that front.
I think the big problem is that none of these teams are considering as a slam dunk.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like Nebraska going to the Big 10 or Texas A&M going to the SEC, where it makes a lot of sense on a lot of different areas. All these teams are considering have credits and they have debits, and none of them really necessarily bring that national cachet to the table. BYU probably gets the closest, but even then, I mean, if you're thinking about national football powers, I'm not sure Baylor or BYU is necessarily the team you immediately come to mind.
Well, we appreciate you joining us this week for our Big 12 football report. I am Tommy Smith, rattleandhumsports.com. You Matthew Postins. Matthew, have a good weekend down in Nacogdoches.
Yep, headed back to the alma mater this weekend to see SFA host Southeastern Louisiana. Maybe we can win one.
All right, well, we'll find out Monday of next week when we do this again. Thanks a lot for joining us.